everyone, this is John Daly. I'm back with another episode of the Daily Express. Today I'm here with another international author interview. Last time I talked to Mark Stephen Porot over in France. Today I'm talking to a very talented fiction writer who's currently south of the border, down in Mexico. He is the author of the award-winning Miles Darien Detective Series. I'm talking about Harry Pinkus. How's it going today, Harry?
Good, John. Good to see you.
Thank you, thank you. Where are you in Mexico right now? And is the weather nice down there?
We're in Puerto Vallarta, and yes, as always, 82 and sunny. You can count on it every day.
Wow, very nice, very nice. Well, let's talk about your books. You have released three novels just within the last 4 years or so. So you've been doing a lot of fiction writing as of late. But your experiences in writing actually date back quite a bit further than that. Can you talk about your origins in writing and how you eventually came around to creative writing?
Yeah, well, I guess it all starts with storytelling, which we start with when we're kids. Everybody's telling a story about something, and then there's in school and what have you. It got serious for me when I was in college and I wrote for the campus newspaper. And that was very enlightening, but it obviously wasn't fiction, or it wasn't supposed to be anyway. Um, and then my business career was not so much, again, fiction, but the need to write and convince people of a certain way of thinking. I was responsible for presentations, development of them, going into Fortune 500 companies and convincing them to do business with the company that I worked for, and then subsequently the company I owned. And that evolved later on into doing work for websites, writing content, and so forth. Quick story. Before I started with the novels or got any progress with them, we were out to dinner with a friend and his wife, and she said to me, she's a professor of creative writing, and she started talking about creative writing. And I said, you know what? I wrote 3 chapters of a book once a few years ago. And she stopped and stared at me and said, if you don't finish that book, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. So I went back and finished the book. And that was The Kingmaker's Redemption, which was my first published novel. And now it's nourishment for me, the writing. I can see in the not too, maybe a week away from finishing the 4th book, which
Wow.
is exciting to get to that point. But it's also difficult because you want to end with some excitement. So I'm searching for excitement.
Well, let's talk about the excitement there. You've written the Miles Darien Detective Series. Your newest book is Justified Malice, although you're working on another one. You're about ready to complete it. What is Justified Malice about, and what is Miles Darien about?
Well, let me start with what Miles Darien is about. I try to put my own beliefs into my books, the things I believe in, the things I think are important for people to understand. Now, Miles Darien is a gay Jewish New Yorker who is living in Wisconsin and is a private investigator. And part of the interest in the novel, or part of where I was going with that, is to show the acceptance of somebody from being an outsider in so many ways, becoming part of a community and building friendships and a business and what have you. And again, it was out of my comfort zone. I don't happen to be gay, and I'm not from New York. So it's interesting that to me to try to develop a character that's outside of my own norm. The books, and Justified Malice in particular, are generally a collection of small cases culminating in a large one, private investigator cases. And in Justified Malice, Miles had worked with the FBI on the previous book, Human Collateral, and they had brought down a terrible crime ring that was killing people by making them sacrifice body parts to pay off their loans. It was a loan sharking scheme. And in the end, with the help of the FBI, because they got involved in the process, Miles brings it down, and unfortunately, the boss of the crime boss, if you will, escapes. In Justified Malice, Miles happens to be in Mexico. I had to get Mexico in there, and he's contacted by the FBI that they understand that this crime boss has established roots in Mexico, and since they aren't able to conduct investigations or pursue him in Mexico, they enlist Miles once again to see if he can find him, and he does, and then the chase is on.
Well, it's interesting. You talked about, bringing your own experiences into your writing, but then also, you know, developing a character that's not like you. I think there is a temptation to do that, as a fiction writer myself. I write from the Colorado setting, from the Colorado mountains, something I grew up in. But I, my Sean Coleman protagonist, he's a very different than me. Sort of a struggling alcoholic. I don't drink, never have. But yeah, it sort of lays out this challenge because it's you put a character in a position where they are sort of an outsider, and that I think helps add to stories. Shows them how they navigate those things as well. So you talked about you've written parts that are in Mexico. Again, we'd mentioned you're in Mexico right now. You get down there a fair amount, I assume, to hide out from the U.S. authorities, Harry. But
Absolutely.
exactly. Well, so what are some of your favorite things to do down there? You're in Puerto Vallarta. What do you like to do down there?
Well, first of all, it's a totally different food experience, and I like to think of myself as a foodie. And interestingly, there's a lot of Italian food here for some reason. I don't know what the derivation of that is, but it's a great food experience. The street food here is amazing. Um, Walking the beach, there's a part of Puerto Vallarta called the Malecon, which is a long, mile and a half long, wide concrete walkway along the beach, which is beautiful, and it's got fancy tall brass sculptures and all. That's fun. The art scene is great. The music scene here is fantastic. Um, Obviously, the weather, and this is an interesting part I think about life. Wherever we go and we stay for any period of time, you get to meet people, and we have friends here now, a dozen or so, that we see on a regular basis when we're here and we correspond with when we're home. So that's been a wonderful aspect of it. Puerto Vallarta has a world famous botanical garden, which is a beautiful place to go and walk, a great zoo. Obviously, if you're a jungle adventurer and you want to go zip lining through the jungle, you can do that too. One of my favorite activities is whale watching. This is where the whales come from Alaska to breed and to give birth the following season. So there's a lot of activity in Banderas Bay, and we've gone out and basically frolicked with the whales.
Well, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun down there. That's great.
Yeah,
From what I understand, you are also a car guy. You used to work on cars as a hobby, and you have some views sort of on the contribution of vehicles to American culture and society that perhaps go beyond some of the obvious ones. Care to share your thoughts on that topic?
sure. Well, first of all, I guess we have the Eisenhower administration in the 50s to thank for the expansion of the automobile to the greatest extent when they built the interstate system. And people started using cars to travel as opposed to just get from point A to point B and wherever it is they lived. Um, it's also been a developmental metaphor, if you will, for progress. If you look at the automobile over time and the way in which the technology and the artistry of them has developed, it's really kind of as I say, a metaphor for what's happened in our country. Um, yeah, when I was a kid, my dad used to take me out for car rides, and he would point to a car, and I'd have to tell him the make and the model of that car. Unfortunately, in today's world, they all look the same. My wife and I had a great laugh the other day before we came down here. We came upon 6 white SUVs lined up, all different models, and they all look the same. All different brands, all look the same. So that was interesting. As it relates to my sadness about today's cars. First of all, I love the fact that there are backup cameras and there's GPS and sensors and uh, adjustable cruise controls and all of those things that make driving safer and easier. But I have a friend who's a mechanic, and he has to go to school on a weekly basis to figure out how to do certain things. The complications of computers and sensors and what have you. I know a couple of instances where people have taken a car into the dealer because it's given them some kind of a warning message. They go in, they supposedly fix, they take it home, and the same thing happens all over again, and nobody can figure it out. In the old days, if it was running rough, you got a new carburetor. I mean, it's just, and that was really a lot of fun for me. I learned. My father allowed me to buy my own car when I was 16 years old because I earned the money, and I promised him that I would learn how to take care of it. And it was a great sense of pride when it didn't run one day and I was able to make it run the next.
That's interesting. I'm curious. What do you think about the look of cars today, the styles? I go back to what my father owned when I was little, and he had this sort of I think things looked much more sleek back then than they do now. And I'm sort of a fan of sort of the retro sci-fi culture where you see where some of these artists sort of depicted how cars would look in the future. And I think a lot of them sort of took the curves and the shapes of these cars from an older era and kind of spruced them up to look even, more sleek in the future. But, we don't see that, I think, as much. Do you have a preference, like a time era that you really like the looks of cars, or do you think they look good now? You might.
Well, they look good for what they are, but I miss the ornamentation. The bullet tail lights and the things like that were unique. You could say, I know that's a Cadillac just by the tail light or whatever that might be. And I grew up where fins became a big thing on the rear end of and that whole era. I think cars today are more about what's inside than what's outside. Um, the mechanics of them, the comfort of them, the way the insides are laid out, the computers, all that business. But they're not as aesthetically pleasing to me. They're made to be aerodynamic. And as I said before, that there's such a sameness that kind of, I've heard it described as a jelly bean styling, which allows the air to flow properly over the cars. But again, they lack that kind of artistic perspective that they used to have.
No, I think that's definitely true. So I saw somewhere, Harry, sort of a list of pet peeves that you have, and one of them that stuck out to me is that it kind of drives you nuts when you hear people use the word like several times in the same sentence. I think I'm like pretty guilty of that, Harry. And I'm admittedly much better of a writer than I am a talker. I'm curious, do you blame this problem that I and many others suffer from on the public school system, or perhaps cinematic pop culture?
I think a lot of it is pop culture. Just to give you an example, I heard a young woman, describing to a friend of hers about her doctoral thesis and used like six times in the sentence to describe it. So that just struck me as being totally out there. Um, I, I think that the emphasis in schools now is uh, not so much on strict grammar as it is on expression. And pop culture has a lot to do with it. Social media has a lot to do with it, I think. People are hearing what sounds good to other people. If they go on the media and they see uh, some pop star using like frequently, then they assume that's part of the current lexicon. Um, and I'm easily annoyed, so that's one of
Well,
the,
go ahead.
it's just like it's like manners. People have they, everybody has their own form of behavior and speech patterns and whatever, and I kind of get mad at myself when I'm critical of that and not allowing people to be critical of me. It's easy to do it from afar.
Well, it's funny too because I think it is probably a pop culture thing to some extent. I mean, I look back at what I grew up in, the era of Wayne's World and Beavis and Butthead a little bit later, and I still
Right.
find myself, when I'm addressing people, saying "dude," beginning with "dude," and but I think you mentioned the grammar part of that too. I think what sort of drives me nuts, and it may is you as well, just as writers. I have children. We're texting each other. They're all older now. They're both now just barely adults. But you look at the grammar in like the text grammar, and it's just ridiculous. And they always give me a hard time because I go through, I add the proper punctuation. I do the complete sentences. It takes a lot longer when I'm texting them, but everything there is an abbreviation, it's an acronym, there's no punctuation. That does sort of drive me nuts, and I think it does sort of carry across. It's not just in the text world. I see that every now and then in written assignments by my kids where I'm like, okay, you realize you can't write this like you're writing a text, right? But I think there really is something to that as far as from a cultural perspective.
Yeah, I can't tell you how, can't even count the number of times I've had to go into Google to figure out what a three-letter acronym means. See you later, or whatever it might be, not suitable for work or something like that. And I've had to look those up. The other thing, which is kind of dovetails into that and talks about writing and grammar and what have you, my niece's son, when he was in high school, they stopped teaching, or when he was in grade school, they stopped teaching cursive writing. No longer did it because they didn't need it. Everything was digitized and done on a phone or a computer or what have you. And they had to bring it back because kids couldn't write a check. They couldn't sign their name. So they had to bring back cursive writing as a subject matter and teaching it once again. So not everything that's old is bad, and not everything that's new is bad. I mean, it takes a kind of a blend of those things. But yeah, it is funny how texting has taken over our communications. I'm a long-winded guy, and I like to have my say. So these 3 or 4 word texts drive me crazy when I know there's more expression I need to add to it.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned about not knowing what the little acronyms mean. I every time I try, if I see one that I don't understand, I try to take a guess at it. I'm always wrong. So yeah, I'm out there too on Google trying to figure out what this is. Something else you mentioned that about cursive writing. Something that
Oh, I
drives me.
lost you, John.
Oh, am I still here?
Now you're back.
Okay, okay. Sorry about that. Yeah, I was just carrying on about the text acronyms and how I have a lot of trouble with that too. But the you brought up the point about cursive writing. I think that's a good one. And also, what drives me nuts now as a parent is that in high school they don't teach typing anymore. And that typing 1 and 2 when I was in high school, those were some of the most helpful classes I have ever taken. Throughout high school. And although at the same time, I watch my daughter plug away on a keyboard. She's not doing home row. She's not. I don't know what she's doing, but she can still type pretty well and pretty fast. It's almost like people are sort of kind of figuring out their own format. I'm not convinced it's as good as the old school kind, but it's sort of amazing how culture just kind of goes in a certain direction, and in some cases it seems to work for them.
Sure. Well, I have a brother-in-law who cannot type a word. So anything he wants to send a message via text, he dictates it, and it translates that. And some of the translations are not exactly the words that were intended.
Oh yeah, no, I do a lot of that myself. The dictation, especially when I'm writing text, I do because I cannot on the little screen do what I want to do. But so you had brought up Harry manners a little bit earlier. Um, You are always very polite. When I talk to you, you've never called me any names, at least not to my face. So, and you seem like a very good-natured fellow. I feel, however, that our country right now, we aren't nearly as civil with each other as we used to be. We aren't as tolerant. We tend to assume really bad things of people we don't really know. Uh, what do you blame that on? And how do you think we as a society can fix that problem?
Well, first of all, to me, manners are really an expression of kindness, and that to me is what lacks. And some of it is the ability to anonymously attack people online. You know, you think about it, you make up a handle and you go after people. It's a full, the bullying part of it just is very dismaying for me. I can't get my arms around why people need to do that. Um, and the stuff you see, you know, opening up a door for somebody, waiting at a stop sign to let pedestrians cross. Uh, those things, everybody's in such a hurry and so much about themselves and not enough about the greater good for culture. So, yeah, I wish I knew why this is this has happened. Um, you know, there's a lot about when I grew up and all the quote unquote manners and the things that my parents taught me that were fine. There was also a lot of that stuff. There was a lot of intolerance, just wasn't spoken. Now it seems to be okay to express your mind, no matter how virulent it might be and how offensive it might be to some people.
Yeah, that's a good point. Comparing the private discussions, what people may have always been, this way, but they're much more comfortable doing it publicly now. And I think you bring up a good point about anonymity because that really people say things to each other under a fake name that they would never say under their real name. And
Exactly.
yeah, so I think that's I'm not against people being anonymous on the internet and all that. But yeah, there is something to that. I write in addition to my fiction stuff, I write a lot about politics. So I get called names by anonymous people like all the time, and they're not like good names, Harry. They're bad names. And but no, I think that's right. Do you yeah, it's and maybe that's why people are nicer on Facebook, where you kind of know who people are, as opposed to like Twitter and some of these other ones. But
Exactly. Exactly. And you know the whole Facebook controversy. I have a very good friend who just went off of Facebook permanently. He's upset about the politicalization of uh, Facebook and X and all these other platforms. And I understand and agree with it. But it's like any other tool. It's how you use it to me that's important, not necessarily what's behind it. Um, that's just, you know, where my head is at.
yeah, no, I agree with that. I've been saying for years, I think social media really is what you make of it, and a lot of people make bad things of it. But even in that case, there's tools out there to sort of filter out the worst stuff, to block people. There is, I think it's all good stuff. But yeah, I think if social media had been around when I was younger, when I was a kid, and it wasn't for you and I, of course, I can't imagine, all the insecurities that I would have felt, people calling me things online. Today I usually just sort of laugh it off because it really is pretty silly. But yeah, no, I do feel for younger people. I know, it's tough when we were young, we would hear about how, maybe some friend of ours had a party that we weren't invited to, and it hurt. But now it's like you have, friends of yours who are throwing out pictures and videos of them at the party that you can see. It doesn't. Speaking from like a kid's perspective. But yeah, it's a different culture for sure.
Yeah, no question. But we're we're not going to change it. We're going to have to adapt to it. And a lot of it, again, you know, you talk about kids, a lot of it is the training they get at home and how that's dealt with. Sadly, there's a number of cases where we've had these school shootings, which are a result of a kid being bullied online by other kids and things like that. So um, there, I don't have the answer, but I do recognize the problem.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion, Harry. I know you're enjoying the life down there in Mexico, so I don't want to take up any more of your time. So, but I appreciate you coming on the Daily Express. I always enjoy talking to you. I'm going to put a link to your books in the show notes so people can easily check them out. Where else can people find out about you and your writing?
Well, I have a website. It's harrypinkus.com. Very catchy title. Um, and it's got a complete description of my books and reviews and uh, notes and awards and all the other stuff. So if they really want to learn, that's where they can go. It also tells them where they can find the books if they should want to buy one,
Excellent,
or two,
excellent.
or three.
Well, exactly, exactly. He's got three out there. They're great. They've won awards. He's got a fourth one that'll be out before I think people realize it, before people know it. So thanks again, Harry, and I hope people check those out. And I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, John. Always a pleasure.